Hi everyone, and welcome back to another installment in the AgilePoint Generative AI video series. Now this video is going to be a little different than those you'd seen previously. In prior videos, we had used various source material, things like Excel, PDF, or even a prompt, to build an application and a data store on the fly in the AgilePoint platform. Now this is a great way to quickly and easily spin up a new application built entirely on top of AgilePoint. But what about scenarios where I already have an existing data source and simply want to generate an interface on top of it? So that's the scenario that we'll explore for today. And in light of all of the recent changes in the Microsoft world, particularly in SharePoint, with things like changes to the add-in model and deprecation of SharePoint workflow, why not start with SharePoint for our first example of using an external data source? So if you'll be impacted by the upcoming changes in the SharePoint world, please do read this blog and understand how AgilePoint has you covered. Going forward, if you'd like to keep your data within SharePoint and would like to move away from other third-party app platforms, please continue watching this video. We're going to show you how this functionality works for both form-based applications as well as process-based applications. Okay, so let's get started by building a new form-based application. Okay, so I've given my application a name and dropped it into a category. Now this screen is probably familiar if you've seen the other videos. It's asking me if I'd like to create a widget form, which is created with the express purpose of hosting on a landing page. So that doesn't apply to us. We'll leave not required selected. And as you're seeing here, when AgilePoint is asking me if I'd like to use AI to create my form, there's a new option that's become available. So as you can see here, I now have an option to auto-generate a form from SharePoint. Now this is going to keep the data source in SharePoint, but simply build a user interface on top of that data. Now we're starting first with SharePoint, as I mentioned, because a lot of changes have been happening in that world. But in subsequent releases, you'll also see this same functionality applied to both databases as well as Salesforce. Now before I select my data source, let's just bring up the list that we're going to use. All right, so here you can see my work progress tracker list. And as you would expect with SharePoint, my UI formatting options are pretty limited. I have a single column with a number of text fields, choice fields, date, people picker, etc. So this is going to be the basis for our data store. And let's go ahead and select the list in AgilePoint. Okay, so just to save some time here, I've navigated to the appropriate list in SharePoint. Okay, so we can go ahead and use all of the available fields and go ahead and click Next. Now you're probably noticing that this interface looks a little different than some of the other AI videos. Say in the PDF or Excel examples, for instance, I could change the data type. But because this is coming over from SharePoint, SharePoint is already aware of the correct data type, which gives me options here then to change the field type used on the form. And as you're seeing on the left-hand side here, AgilePoint has correctly interpreted the required fields for my data source. Now on the right-hand side under field type, everything is looking pretty good, but you'll notice there are a few that I need to configure, which are drop-down lists. Now because AgilePoint is reading these values from SharePoint, you're seeing here a third option. It has already pre-populated all of the values for my drop-down list. Now, there might be scenarios where a third-party add-in is used to design the UI. So next, we'll show you how AgilePoint can take these existing interfaces and bring them over to the AgilePoint platform. So as an example here, rather than the single column layout you'd seen previously, I have some rows with multiple columns, some with a single that's stretched all the way across. So let's see how AgilePoint can ingest this existing layout built in another system and bring it over to AgilePoint. So as you can see here in the top right-hand corner, I have an option called Apply Layout. And I'm going to upload the file that I've just shown you. And as you can see here, when I select Show the Line Breaks, it's going to preserve that layout faithfully. Okay, so what we're going to see here is our fully configured form-based application that retrieves and stores data within our SharePoint list. Okay, so here's our fully built application. Just bring this up in preview mode here. And as you can see here, I have my text box, rich text, my drop-down values coming from SharePoint. So now I can publish this and associate it with my SharePoint list if I'd like to access this application from within SharePoint and replace the default ListForms experience. Or I can use it as is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is available for both process and form-based applications. Okay, so as we mentioned, this is going to be a process-based application. Okay, so I've given my process model a name, left it triggered by eForms, and given it a single swim lane. Now here, AgilePoint is asking me how I'd like to create the process. Now you've probably seen me use various flavors of AI to create the process previously, so for today, we're going to go with creating the process myself. All right, now as you can see here, I still have the ability to auto-generate my form based on SharePoint. And we'll go ahead and navigate to our list. Okay, so now that I've selected my list, as you can see here, it drops us into the same interface to review and recategorize the fields as we'd shown previously. And just as we did last time around, you're seeing here, I can still apply the layout if I've used a third-party tool to generate my interface. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of how quickly you can build interfaces on top of your existing SharePoint datasets and transition away quickly from the components that have been deprecated. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.